I don't know if you caught that one line in our first reading this morning where it said that the scribe Ezra read from the scriptures and preached from daybreak till midday. It's a long time. I promise I won't keep you that long this morning, okay? I promise I won't do that to you. A few years ago, I saw a 60 Minutes episode about the actress Mary Lou Henner. Some of you might remember her from the 1980s comedy show Taxi. She was on that show. But at the time, Henner was one of only 6 people in the entire world who'd been identified as having an almost supernatural skill. You can give Mary Lou Henner any random date, July 15th, 1979, and she can tell you in remarkable detail everything about that day in her life. She can tell you what day of the week it was, what she was wearing, who she had conversations with, what she was doing, the nature of those conversations, and on and on. Absolutely everything that she did on that day. Now, it's been a lot of years since I saw that episode, and I'm just kind of curious if we can identify anyone else who maybe has developed that skill in the meantime, too. So I want to do a little experiment here on Sanctity of Life Sunday. I'd like you to think back in your own life as far as you can to your earliest memory. Go back in your mind to that earliest memory that you have of your own life. And I mean think way, way, way back, as far as you can. Now, with a show of hands, do you remember the day that you were conceived and began your life as a single-celled zygote? Anyone remember that day? I don't see any hands. Okay. Well, how about 21 days after that when your heart began to beat? Any hands on that one? No, not that one either, huh? All right, how about 40 days after you were conceived and your brain began to function? No takers on that one either? Well, what about the day you were born? Does anyone remember the day that they were born? Anyone remember that day? Not that one either, right? Of course, it would be truly remarkable if you were able to say yes to any of those questions, right? I suspect even Mary Lou Henner would have trouble with those too. And yet, God himself remembers and cherishes all those moments in your life. Every one of those moments in your life. Because you were truly and completely you already in those moments. And God knew you. And he loved you. And he intended for you to be. You know, the book of the prophet Jeremiah, one of my favorite books in all the scriptures, we hear God say this: "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I consecrated you." You know, after 49 years of pro-abortion propaganda and lies, it's easy for us to miss the real value that every human being has even before they're born. Even before they're born. You know, from a scientific point of view, all that's happening in the womb is physical growth and development. That's it. And from that point of view, our embryonic development as human beings, it's not much different or more remarkable than the embryonic development of any other animal, for that matter. And it's that narrow view of human life that allowed Peter Singer, who's a bioethicist who teaches at Princeton University, to say this. He said, "The life of a newborn baby is of less value than the life of a pig or a dog or a chimpanzee." He actually said that and believes that. And it's that narrow view that's also used to justify the killing of human beings before they're born. But of course, science by itself is totally blind to the supernatural mystery that's happening in the womb. So listen again to what God says in the book of Jeremiah about that amazing stage in each of our lives. He says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you." I already knew you, God says. You know, in the biblical sense, when God knows someone, it doesn't just mean that he recognizes that person. Like, "Oh, I've seen you before. You're familiar. I think I know who you are." No, it doesn't mean that at all. It means that he intimately loves and unites himself to that person. When God says he knows you, it means that he intimately loves you and unites himself to you. You know, Mary uses that same word, to know, when she's told that she's going to give birth to the Messiah. So she says, "How can this be when I have not yet known a man. In other words, Mary is saying, well, how can I be pregnant when I've not yet intimately loved my husband and been united to him as one flesh? Intimacy and unity. So God's using that same term about intimate and uniting love to describe his relationship with each one of us, even while we were still being formed in the womb. Why would he do that? Why would he do that? Why would he love us like that when we were still these tiny little embryos? Well, the answer is found when we continue to read from Jeremiah. The very next line, God says, "Before you were born, I consecrated you." I consecrated you. Of course, to consecrate something means to make it holy, to dedicate it for a special purpose, to set it apart from ordinary things. For instance, think about how we use the word consecrate when we're talking about the Eucharist. When the priest consecrates the bread and wine during Mass, what's happening there? What's he doing? Well, he's setting it apart from ordinary bread and wine so that God can make it holy and dedicate it for the purpose of his love. So, what exactly does God consecrate you and me to before we're even born? What does he mean by that? Well, we find the answer in the early verses of the creation story when we hear, God created man in his own image and likeness. Male and female, he created them. Now, to be made in God's own image and likeness is not referring to our physical appearance, our physical characteristics. It means that we were made to receive and give love in the same way that God himself gives and receives love. And no other creature in this entire planet and all of creation can make that claim. But that means that before we're even born, two things happen. First of all, we're set apart for the purpose of God's love. And secondly, we're dedicated to participate in God's unconditional love for all eternity. And that is true, of course, of every single human being, no matter the timing or the circumstances of their conception. Of course, that passage from Jeremiah goes on, and God says, "Before you were born, I appointed you," he's talking to Jeremiah, "I appointed you a prophet to the nations." So when Jeremiah was still developing in his mother's womb, God had already given him a specific assignment, as it were. Something that was going to be a necessary part of God's plan for the world, for salvation. And again, that appointment was given to Jeremiah even before he was born, even before he was conceived. In the eyes of science, of course, while he's in the womb, Jeremiah was nothing more than some insignificant biological tissue. But in reality, in the eyes of God, Jeremiah was an immeasurable, irrepeatable mystery of eternal love. And so are you and I and every human being who's ever been. In other words, the Peter Singers of the world couldn't be more wrong. Couldn't be more wrong. From the moment of conception, every human being is far, far more valuable than any pig or dog or chimpanzee or any other animal for that matter. And that means, too, that every person who advocates for or fights for or passes laws in favor of abortion couldn't be more tragically misguided, because every preborn child is the image of God himself. Every preborn child has already been set aside for the purpose of God's eternal love. Every preborn child has already been given a specific assignment to carry out God's love in a very specific way that no one else ever can and ever will. Our Lord Jesus Christ didn't have to come into the world as an unborn baby. No, he's God. He could have appeared however he wanted to. He could have appeared instantly as a powerful king or as a great warrior. But he didn't. He didn't. Why not? Well, Jesus came into the world as a preborn child to teach us something vitally important. He was saying, this is where love begins. This is where love begins. And real power and greatness is only found in love. Only if we first love the littlest and most vulnerable of all people, only then will we truly understand what being a Catholic, what being a Christian, what being a follower of Jesus Christ, what being a human being is really all about.